Hey, what's up, man? How you doing?
Pretty good, man. How are you?
You're doing really good, man. Just a little tired. I just finished working out. But like my boy Trav always says, I'm always tired.
Yeah, you're always tired, man. He's the opposite of Kevin Gates, man. Kevin Gates don't get tired. This man stays tired.
It's like the scene in the first Avengers movie where Captain America was just like, it's time for you to get angry. And he's like, that's my secret. I'm always angry. But that's me. I'm always angry.
Tired. That you're always tired? That's the deal? How long was the set? Was the workout set?
I got there at 5 o'clock. So I was there for at least a good 2 hours.
Ooh, that'll do it.
Yeah.
Usually he spends a good 3 in the gym though, so he cut it short today.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure that we was on time for the podcast today.
So you're not just like on the mic, just kind of falling out and snoring.
I'm good right now, man. I'm pumped. I'm pumped to do this. It's like Trav, he always jokes around about like, how do you just get like this burst of energy whenever it's time to start recording? And I was just like, bro, because it's like
that's because you should see the way he walks through the door.
it's like I'm a slug and everything. Then we get up here in the podcast room and it's just like, all right, let's go.
See, that's how you know you're doing something that you really like doing.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, thanks again for joining us today, man. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely, man. This is going to be great. I'm excited.
Yeah, and this is really cool, man, because and coincidentally, I didn't even know this, but when he had reached out to you to get on the podcast and I had looked and seen that you voiced on As Told by Ginger, that's one of my go-to Nickelodeon shows, and I was like, holy crap, like, dude, we're getting this guy from As Told by Ginger. Yeah. That is awesome.
Nice. I'm glad you like that show.
Yeah, man. So we really appreciate you coming on. That was a
great experience. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, man. It's like, I felt like after I finished watching Cannon Busters that I had to reach out to you, man, because you did a phenomenal job up there voicing Philly the Kid.
Oh, thank you, man. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And it's like when I had looked it up and I was like, Kenny Blank. Ken Michael, I know who that is. It's like of course everybody in the 90s, they grew up watching WB and you were on the Parenthood.
Yep.
So tell us a little bit about that. Like, how was it being on that show? Like, you were up there with Robert Townsend and Faison Love. Like, how was it just, growing up as a teen and being on that show?
Well, I mean, the crazy thing was that it was, that show was kind of like the end of my teenage years, which had been just an amazing series of experiences that I was able to have in the career that I was doing, because not only was I a child actor and I'd been doing tons of commercials before the Parenthood, but I was also, a budding filmmaker. And so the Hudlin brothers, who did House Party and Boomerang and all that stuff, they kind of took me under their wing. So I was able to be on the set of Boomerang, for example, and watch their process and watch how they created that movie and how they worked with all this amazing talent, Eddie Murphy and Martin Lawrence and, Halle Berry and all these amazing people. And so amongst, being able to sort of act and be in front of the camera, which I love doing, I was also learning a lot of the stuff behind the camera. And so I was having these great experiences in front of the camera, but being able to kind of see behind the scenes and see how these top people worked at the top of their game was just an amazing experience. So by the time I was in my late teens and I'd booked the Parenthood, it was like another, like, oh, this is about to be another great experience, because of course I was a big fan of Robert Townsend. Of course, Partners in Crime was a huge influence, and all the work that he had done on Hollywood Shuffle. And so what was amazing about that experience was that the WB was a brand new network, and we were one of the first 4 shows. And so when it came time for the screen test, I hadn't moved to California yet. I was still based out of the East Coast in New York and Connecticut. So I auditioned from New York, and they flew me out to LA for the screen test. And incidentally, I was screen testing opposite Ray J. Right. So it was me and Ray J up for that part.
How old is Ray J?
I don't know. I feel like we're in similar age categories, obviously. But I think he might be a little younger than me. But of course, we had come into contact with each other over the years, auditioning together. I knew Brandy, and, it was that pack of these, young cats who were just out there trying to book stuff.
Yeah.
And so the screen test took place at the WB headquarters, which was like this building on the Warner Burbank lot. And it was brand new. There was nothing up there. It was just, they had a big cardboard cutout of Michigan J. Frog, which was their mascot. And that was like the logo for the network.
I love that.
And
dude.
so it was deep seeing, that cartoon is classic.
So, yeah.
And you know what I mean? And so to be a part of the start of this brand new network and kind of seeing how they built up all the stuff with the affiliates and how they did the promo. I mean, when they launched the network, they had Chuck Jones there, who was the main animator for Warner Brothers and who had actually done that Michigan J. Frog cartoon. And so I got to meet him. And I was just like, you're the guy who's responsible for friggin' like all these classic Looney Tunes cartoons. Like so I mean, just, it was just amazing experiences. Because then of course, I think that first season was us, Wayans Brothers, Unhappily Ever After, and I'm forgetting the fourth show. What was the fourth show? I can't remember, but I remember the network was trying to sort of take the more edgy comedy stance. So they really were into the Wayans Brothers and Unhappily Ever After, like the real sort of cynical, violent kind of comedy. And we were the family show. And so the network wasn't really checking for us, but the country was, because at the time, I think politically that was like Bush and the moral values and family values and all that kind of stuff. So the country was like, oh, new family show, we like it. And the network was like, try these other things. And they're like, I don't know. So the affiliates were very, very much into the Parenthood, but not as much the network. And so they kept kind of pushing us around a little bit and kind of just seeing what stuck. And I remember the first season, if you remember the show, every episode they do a fantasy sequence, right?
Yeah, that was my favorite part of the show.
Right. And so that first season, they were really trying to push the envelope with how racy they could get this family show. And I remember one of the first episodes, he had some fantasy sequence and it was like him in the bed and it was supposed to be Jerry, his wife, underneath the covers and, all this stuff. And then out pops the housekeeper / maid, who's like this older woman. And then like some other, and it was one of those things that was like, it was kind of funny on page, but the way that it felt when we did it, it was a little strange, but they did it anyway. And we lost a bunch of advertisers and it was like the second week just because it was like, oh no, you can't really cross that line on a family show. You gotta sort of maintain that balance. So,
you gotta keep the
just
positive image that y'all were presenting on the show at the time.
Yeah, because I think, the thing is, it's like when parents sit down with their kids and they go, okay, this is a family show. I can feel safe having this on in front of my kids, and I don't have to sort of police this show as much because I know that it's going to be safe viewing for children. And I think when a network starts to try and push that boundary in an envelope, and certain parents, they just don't know if they can have that program on for their kids. And I think that was kind of the big deal. But we found the stride, and they figured out how to keep that balance, how to do some slightly racy jokes, but still keep the family vibe happening. And we were able to go a couple of years. I was on there for 3, and I was also doing the music for the show as well.
Oh, nice. And
so it was a great experience. Of course, working with Robert all day, and then Faison came on, I think in season 2. And he was just, of course, Faison is just hilarious. And so the awesome thing just going to work every day was just, okay, how is Faison going to ad lib today? And how is he going to make us all laugh in the middle of a take? How is he going to do what's not written on the page and come up with some great joke? So that ended up being a lot of fun to be a part of. Incidentally, the other thing is the kids on the show were amazing. Curtis Williams and Ashley Adams, who are now grown adults. Ashley just had a kid, had a baby, and I think so did Curtis. Yeah, so they both have kids. But at the time we were shooting, they were just these little tiny little human beings, and they were so professional. They never messed up their lines. It was always the adults who were flubbing lines. Me and Reagan, who played Zarya, we hardly messed up. We were just like, let's get the work done, and let's make sure that every take is a good take. And then I think it was like the end of maybe second season, and they had the blooper reel that came out at the wrap party, and we were not in it because we never messed up.
That's a good thing.
It's a good thing, but at the end of the season, you want to
be a part of the blooper reel too.
So the next season we were just like, all right, we're gonna schedule our mess ups, and we're gonna make them epic. So we'll make the blooper reel, and we did. Yeah, and that was fun.
Sometimes I'll get lost on YouTube videos just going through blooper reels.
Oh man!
Especially a lot of the movies where they kind of make up lines as they go, like a lot of the Will Ferrell movies and stuff like that, where they're just kind of bantering off of each other. But you had brought up that
I was just gonna mention the Will Ferrell stuff. I think those really are
they're so hilarious. They just try.
Bloopers.
And what's crazy is something that I always bring up with Trav is how, remember back in like the 90s and early 2000s, at the end of every movie, they had like the bloopers on set, like what happened in the movies.
Yeah.
Like they don't do that anymore in movies.
They don't do that anymore. I don't know why. I really don't know why. Because it's so much fun to just sort of see, pull that curtain back.
Yeah.
And feel like, oh, that's what it was like. Oh, okay. I'll tell you, from my experience, just for example, like Boomerang, that would have been an amazing movie to see bloopers from, because oh my gosh, there was so much ad-libbing in that movie, and so many classic scenes that we remember were they were started from ad-libs. Eddie would do a joke, or Grace Jones would do a joke, or what I saw a lot of times, Martin would do a joke on the first take, and then the second take, Eddie would then have that joke. And so there was like all these like politics that were in play in terms of like who got the joke or who came up with this one. And there was a lot of like that, comedian code that was happening because, Eddie brought in Chris Rock, and he was really new, and, Eddie was really vouching for him. And so it was just, a lot of these stories that exist, that are out there that, just make you kind of think a little bit more about the people who you love watching on screen, Yeah,
because if I remember correctly, wasn't it Eddie who was responsible for getting Chris Rock on Saturday Night Live back in the day?
Probably something like that. Probably. Because the thing that was amazing on set of Boomerang was that, like I said, Chris was new. Yeah. And so he was brand new to the whole movie thing. And so he wasn't really hitting his marks all the time. And, like all the takes he wasn't really hitting it because he was new. And I'm sure, being in that kind of a space with those people, that had to have been kind of crazy for him. And so there were people on set who were like, I don't understand why Eddie's vouching for this guy and all this stuff. And Eddie was just like, no, this is the guy. Just watch, wait. He may be a little new right now, but just watch. He's going to be incredible. So Eddie was very cool like that.
Just this list of random stories you're bringing up is mind blowing to me. We're talking about Chris Rock before he was Chris Rock.
Yeah.
That's just insane. And then of course, Eddie in his prime. And
oh man.
I can't imagine being around Eddie Murphy, like that raw Eddie Murphy before he settled down.
Well, so here's the crazy thing about that, because I feel like this was right at a time where he was kind of starting to settle down, because this was Boomerang was after he did Harlem Nights, I think.
This is like 1992.
Yes, exactly. And so because of what happened with the Hudlin brothers, they had this organization called the Black Filmmakers Foundation based out of New York. And it was really set up to, this was in the late 80s, early 90s. So of course there was no internet, and there was no sort of easy community that you could kind of just sort of be involved in if you were a young filmmaker and didn't have any kind of connections to any kind of studio system. The indie thing was just kind of starting to pop off. So this was a great incubator for that type of stuff. And so I was the youngest member of that, the community of that Black Filmmakers Foundation, the BFF. And I would go to these things and, 8 or 9 years old, and they'd have these screenings of these short films, these feature films. And I'd have these questions about, technical things and why the director chose this specific camera or film stock. That's how far back we're going, film stock. Mm-hmm. And so Reggie and Warrington kind of like saw me in the crowd. Oh, okay. This kid seems to be serious about the craft. And, let's bring him in a little bit and see if he's really, really serious. And so after a couple of years of going to these events and getting to know them a little bit, they were doing Boomerang, and they had this internship program that they put together in collaboration with Paramount, who is the main studio who did Boomerang. And so the idea was they were selecting certain members from the BFF to come in and be an intern based on what kind of job they wanted to do in the industry. If you wanted to do, be wardrobe designer, you come in, you intern under the wardrobe designer on Boomerang, that kind of thing. So they wanted me to be director intern, but I was too young. So they instead made it an apprenticeship. And so I was auditioning at the time, going in for auditions. My mom and I would commute from Stamford, Connecticut into New York City to do these auditions. And then after the auditions, after school, we would go onto the set, and I would just kind of hang out on set and watch them and be involved in just sort of watching and being up under Reggie and Warrington and watching them sort of create this movie. And so one of the first days when I got to sort of meet Eddie Murphy, it was huge. And he was really, really cool right off the bat, really nice. And he was like, hurry up and get legal so we can work together, kind of a thing. And so there was that kind of rapport. And so, every day or whatever, when you're being a shadow, your job is not to sort of be social with everybody, of course,
right?
You're
just
so
learning.
Your job is you're just learning. So you got to shadow the director. You got to be very, quiet, and don't ruin the process. Don't interject unless you're sort of asked to. And so I remember this one day, I must have been a little kind of down and out, feeling a little off, because a lot of the auditions that I had been going on it was the same two characters. It was like, the kid from the projects or the drug dealer. And that was kind of like the two roles that were available for like a teenage, African-American kid. And it was frustrating because there were all these characters that I wanted to be able to play, and those roles were just not being written. And so I guess I must have been energetically moping around the set that day. And I think Eddie kind of like stopped me, and he was like, "Hey, what's going on with you today?" Oh, I don't remember what I told him, but I of course I wasn't going to be like, "Oh, I'm upset because then I was, oh, I'm fine. I don't want to ruin his whatever he was working on or dealing with." So we went on with the day, and a couple hours went by, and a PA walks up to me at some point, and they go, "Eddie wants to meet you in his bus." I was like, "What?" So they take me out to his bus, and I get on the bus, and he sits me down and gives me a pep talk. He was like, "Hey, man, so, what's going on?" I was like, "Well, just these auditions have just been really one note." He's like, "Dude, I know. I get it. And just keep going, keep, persisting. Don't worry about it. It'll be fine." And just proceeds to give me this super, super amazing pep talk. And I'm just sitting there going, I'm sitting in Eddie Murphy's bus, and he's just, this is something he did not have to do at all.
You're right.
Right. And that just meant so much to me. And then after he finished the pep talk, he, goes to this shelf and presses play on a cassette deck and starts playing me songs from his upcoming album. and it's got like Emmanuel Lewis on there, and it's got like all these people. And I'm just like, this is hilarious, because the songs were cool, but it's like with him, Jamie Foxx, any comedian who can sing and do the thing. It's like,
bro, what was the name of this
cool,
album?
I don't even remember. But it was just like, it was one of those things where I was like, I wanted to laugh only because
it's Eddie
Murphy playing. Like, even if the song was legit, the songs were legit. They were legit songs, but it's always hard to separate the comedian from the musician. It's always hard.
He catches a lot of slack for that. Like, the songs are trash. But man, I love Party All the Time.
Party All the Time, bro.
I love that. Like, it's not a joke to me. I love this song.
Bro, I can't remember the name of the song, but he has a song with Michael Jackson too. And like, he was killing it.
Oh yeah, you remember that video? Do you remember that video?
Yeah,
you gotta do a YouTube where he was like out in the clouds and he was doing that pose with his hands up. Yeah.
It was straight.
That is 90s. The beautiful thing about YouTube, is that all of these things exist on YouTube now.
Like, bro, I love going on YouTube and looking up old Prince videos and just looking at like how visually stylish they were, man. It's like these old videos, like they were sweet back in the day.
Videos matter.
Okay, so now, so here's the crazy thing about the videos, right? Is that in the 90s, especially, that was when those budgets just got huge.
Yeah.
You remember like Puffy videos and Busta Rhymes, and they were doing like $1 million, $2 million videos and stuff. And the thing that I always think about is that these videos were like these epic pieces of like cinematic art. They really were. And The highest resolution that exists for all of those videos is standard definition Digibetacam. So you're never going to see the actual real quality of what they shot. Like, that's all that exists. Because with music videos back then, you shot the thing and then you got rid of the film negative. You did all the visual effects and color correction on this like standard definition, not HD, not anything like that, just square box TV quality. And that would be the video. And that's all that exists. And that is crazy to me, that all these iconic music videos will only ever exist in that low resolution.
Well, I don't know a lot about, obviously the movie production, but I do know that when they shot a lot of this stuff back in the day on like the film, that particular quality itself is like the equivalent of like 20K now. And that's why they're able to go back to these 90s movies and like remaster them.
Well, so that's the thing, is that, yeah, film still is to some extent, but is, well, I mean, it has been eclipsed by digital. And that was a transition that I saw coming way before it was happening. And it was really kind of great to see how that transition happened, right? But film was that gold standard because it just had so much more resolution than what the video formats were of the time. So yeah, so in a movie where they keep that negative, yeah, you can go back and remaster for not only HD, but they go back for 4K. And that's like a great way to sort of continue to make revenue on those film assets, is that you can keep going and remaster them for whatever is the new fangled fancy video format or digital format. And they can always go back to that really high resolution master. For these music videos, like, they got rid of that high resolution master because that wasn't really the format. You did all the stuff in the low resolution video thing after you transferred the raw footage. So that was kind of like the issue. Now, the thing is that digital, when you shoot these movies in 4K now, which is the standard, yeah, now you can do any kind of upscaling, which they'll probably do when things go to 8K, although I feel like acquisition formats are going to be continually rising. We're shooting on 6K now, 8K.
Yep.
And that's really approaching what IMAX is. IMAX is, from a resolution standpoint, is more akin to like 8K, 10K, 12K. But as far as 35 millimeter, and people are going to argue with me on this, but as far as resolution is concerned, I'm not talking about feel or vibe or that kind of like etheric quality of like, what people talk about when they talk about vinyl versus digital.
Right, yeah.
But yeah, there's that quality to motion picture film. Yes, that will always be there. But from a resolution standpoint, yeah, digital is there. We're beyond there. And so that's an interesting thing. So as the aesthetic of what we watch and the content that we watch has changed because the tools have changed, that's always fascinating to me.
Now, going back, I just want to touch on something. I know you had brought up earlier that you were on the first 3 seasons.
Yeah.
What exactly happened with that as far as your character being written off the show? Was that something that, because you had brought up, you kind of getting pigeonholed in the stereotype auditions. Was this something that you made a decision to do, or did they write you off the show, or, if you mind elaborating on it?
Yeah, no, here's how it happened for me, right? We had finished the 3rd season, and I was still, was I living in LA yet? I had a place in LA, but I still would go back to Connecticut for the summer to visit family and stuff. And I remember, there was a week or 2 weeks where we were expecting to get that, what they call the pickup call, where you get a call from the producer saying, "Hey, we're back for another season. Congratulations, blah, blah, blah." Right. So I got that call, and the call was, "We're coming back, but your character isn't." And that was, of course, a bit of a blow because it wasn't like anything that had been brewing. I think what was interesting was that last season, there was definitely some, a little bit of, just a little tension in terms of how I felt like my character was becoming one note. Yeah. Like, once they found out that I could do music on the show, then they pushed his character. When the Parenthood started, like that first season, Michael's character was very much slightly, he was conservative, and he, you know, as I was reading him on the page, it felt very much like Michael Keaton from Family Ties, which, Michael, what was his, Alex Keaton. There we go. I'm like, no, that was Batman.
Yeah, I was
Alex
like,
Keaton from no, Alex Keaton from Family Ties, and that was exciting to me because, you know, Michael J. Fox was a huge influence, and I loved all his work. And I mean, come on, Back to the Future is one of the greatest trilogies of all time. Even if you don't think that the third one is, you know what I mean?
Right.
But
Yeah.
one and two.
All right, well, before we go on, which one is your favorite?
Two.
Exactly. Like, bro.
Two.
I don't understand like why people be sleeping on 2. Like 2, in my opinion, is the best one out of the trilogy.
2 is the greatest one because they get into all of the really awesome time travel concepts.
Exactly.
He's doing all the characters. They got all the tech and stuff and the hoverboards. However, I will say, go back to watching 1 and turn the sound off and watch 1 with no sound and look at how beautifully that, from a director standpoint, how the scenes are blocked, how the camera moves. It's so like, you don't really notice it if, you know, it's like, oh, it's Back to the Future, whatever. But if you really look at how all that stuff is constructed, so beautifully done. So anyway, so Michael J. Fox was huge influence. And so I was excited about the idea of being able to play like an Alex Keaton type of a role, just to be contrary to the rest of the family. It's a lot of humor that is there, a lot of fun character things that you could do. And so that was kind of how he was for the first season. And then at the end of that first season at the rap party, they had a band or whatever, and I played the drums and played the keyboards, and that was kind of like where he does music. And then Michael became the music guy, which was cool for the second season. But then the third season, everything that he was doing was just like, oh, my band.
I remember that.
To the detriment of like family stuff. So there was like an episode where like Zaria was like, maybe like sexually harassed or something at some school dance or whatever, or she was being like hit on by some weird, like really important thing that they had the boyfriend stand up and do something. And her brother is right on stage, like right there. And I remember just saying to the writers, like, no, you can't do that. Like her brother has to be the one who stands up to the bully. Like, hey, that's family. That's what this show is about.
Yeah. Why would he just stand there?
Exactly. And so there was a lot of that kind of stuff where it was like all Michael was just this one note, and he wasn't really being too active in what the family was doing. And that's usually a sign where they kind of get a little bored with something and then they want to sort of bring in a new flavor. And so what ended up happening was they brought in the new character who, you know, they brought in the new flavor. They brought in like this guy that they said like, oh, okay, we can do like the hunk thing for the girls. And he's got a little bit of the street vibe. So we can get some of that in and play off of this family and how they deal with this outsider coming in. So it's all these things that, you know, whatever, like, but it was, of course it was a blow that I didn't really feel for a few years, because I think at that age, there's a bit of oh, you know, whatever, like they're going to do whatever they want to do. Like, fine, I'll just keep doing what I'm doing. You know, there's a bit of that kind of defensiveness that allows you to kind of deal with that kind of a blow. And so as I was still doing the music for the show. So I was still going to the mix sessions and delivering the score and being there where they were doing all the sound posts to finish up each episode. And the thing that killed me the most about that move was that, you know, here's the oldest son in the family, right? The first kid that they made.
Yeah.
And after they mentioned him once on the beginning of the 4th season, and then they never mentioned him again.
Right.
And they had like grandparents come and cousins and nobody mentioned the first son. And to me, it was always like, I mean, it would have at least been cool. Like, oh, he's off at college or he's doing his thing just to keep that thread alive. But
or even brought you back for like the holiday episodes or something.
Something.
It's kind of like the what happened to Judy Winslow on Family Matters.
Oh, totally. She went upstairs and never came back down.
Well, at least, but it's just crazy like how they do that with characters on TV shows, especially when you were up there for 3 seasons. It's not like you were just up there on the first season and that was it.
Right. Exactly. But that's how the business goes, and it's a business first. And so, you know, I think that's kind of the deal is when you're in this type of industry, which is based off of primarily rejection. Because for all, the 99% of the no's, you get that 1% of yes, and then that's something that kind of holds you for a minute, and then you're right back into it. You listen to James Cameron's story, and his first movie was Piranha 2, which was produced by Roger Corman, and he got fired off of that movie, and then he was like stuck in Italy somewhere with a fever when he had the nightmare that became Terminator, and then he got back to LA and he wrote the script and pitched it all around Hollywood, and everybody except for one company said, no, absolutely not. This is ridiculous.
That happened to Sylvester Stallone.
I was just about to say
Rocky.
that. Yeah, with Rocky, yeah.
I feel like that's all the stories start like that. It's like everybody said no except for this one.
Yeah, that's how all the iconic movies happened in the 80s, right?
Exactly. And that's still happening. But I think that's just the nature of the business.
Right. And before we start moving on, as your career develops even more, I did want to go back to one more thing. And that's because when I was a kid growing up, PBS was, kind of what you watched all day.
Yep.
And Reading Rainbow was something that, Reading Rainbow and Barney was on, when I'm 3-4 years old. That's what I watched. Yeah. And on top of that, I was always, and I still am, as a 30-year-old man, obsessed with Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. Watch it I'll never not watch it, So when I read that you read the book Jumanji, which is one of my favorite childhood movies, on Reading Rainbow during the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade episode, that just blew my mind. And
that was like all the boxes ticked.
Yes. And then on top of that, I think we've talked about it before where LeVar Burton doesn't get the credit he deserves.
He doesn't.
Oh my gosh,
people bring up the Bob Ross and the
Mr. Rogers and Steve Irwin.
But he doesn't get the credit he deserves, man.
Reading Rainbow was a staple.
I didn't know I don't know if you had any cool stories like you had with Eddie about him. How was this guy in real life? Your interactions?
Yeah, I didn't have any interaction with LeVar Burton because the way that they did those book reviews, they were completely separate. And the way that happened was, I was at my dad's house in New York, and Reading Rainbow came on or whatever, and they had the book reviews. And at the end of the episode, they were like, if you want to do one of these book reviews, call this number.
Right.
And I was like, I want to do that. Now, the thing was that there were other kids in my class at the time who were doing like some modeling and commercials and all that stuff. And I liked being in front of the camera, but I hadn't thought about sort of professionally doing that. But I also had a gear habit, meaning I wanted to buy equipment. I wanted to buy music and sound equipment, video equipment to build my own little studio. So that was that's what I wanted to do. And commercials and that kind of thing was pretty much the way to do it, because that was going to make me the amount of money that I needed to actually buy these expensive pieces of equipment. And so I remember just kind of going to my dad and being like, I want to see if I can do this Reading Rainbow thing. And we went in and did the audition, and they were like, yeah, he's great. And I did one of them. And then I think my mom took me to the filming of that. And they were, one of the producers sort of said to her, like, he's really good at, being able to handle the dialogue and reading and kind of like being able to speak and be natural in front of camera. And he also seems like he really likes this. You might want to think about maybe putting him in commercials. And that's kind of how everything started. From the Reading Rainbow, and then they brought me back to do a second one, and so that's the extent of the Reading Rainbow story. I didn't have any interaction with LeVar though.
Man, you could have just lied to me, man. And be like, he was great.
Don't want to do that. Don't want to lie, because when you run into him, and oddly enough, right, he's like, oh, I met this kid who did it, and he said, and he's like, I never met him. What? So what? What else was he lying about? I don't want to be that guy.
Yeah.
So I remember that you were in a movie called The Super with Joe Pesci. Yep. How was it working with Joe Pesci? Because this is Joe Pesci that was at Home Alone, Goodfellas. Like, you have any stories about him? Okay,
I'll start by saying this. Joe Pesci wrote me a college recommendation letter to USC.
Wow.
That's crazy.
So that's awesome, bro.
That should say, yeah, Joe Pesci was and I say was not because but I'm saying based on my experience, Joe Pesci is a national treasure. And when we were working on that movie, so like I have asthma, and I had really extreme bad asthma back in those days. And so we had started shooting, and it was like, I want to say like late fall, almost beginning of winter. And the first day we were shooting an exterior out on the street. And we get out and do a rehearsal, and he looks at me, he goes, where's your undershirt? They didn't give you an undershirt? I was like, no, they just, they gave me just these clothes. And he's like, no, you need an undershirt. It's cold out here. No, and so he went and told wardrobe, like, no, you got to give him an undershirt because he's going to catch cold out here. That was like day one. That was day one.
That just showed you the type of person he was.
Oh, he was amazing. Now, the cool thing was while we were shooting, Goodfellas came out. And so, of course, I went and saw the movie, which he was then like, what? You're a little young to be seeing that movie.
Right,
but
yeah.
Since you saw it, he started talking about like the stuff that they cut out of the American version. The scene where he gets, murked, where he thought he was being made. Apparently, that whole sequence was like way more graphic when they shot it, and they had all kinds of stuff that Scorsese had filmed, but they didn't leave in the U.S. release of it, but it was apparently in the European. So of course, these little details for me, I was like, ooh, that's cool. He was fantastic. He was really, really great to work with, and so funny and such a kind person. That was a great experience.
And it's so wild because it's pretty much the complete opposite of every character he's ever played. I mean, usually he's the tough guy.
Yeah.
No, he was fantastic.
So a question that I wanted to ask was about like your music career. You said that you did music on The Parenthood. Like, when did you start getting into doing music on, shows and movies and stuff like that?
Well, music pretty much was my first language. So my mom used to sing and dance with James Brown for 10 years.
Oh, wow.
How do you just nonchalantly mention that?
Yeah, bro, that's cool, man.
So there's that. Like, she was with him like in the 70s, like during the Payback era, like that whole Muhammad Ali fight where they were in Zaire. She was part of his company for that tour. So they went out there, and she's in both of those documentaries about that event. My biological father is a jazz drummer and composer, and he's worked with, Nina Simone and Blood Ulmer and just all these very intense people.
Yeah.
And my stepdad owned a huge recording studio in New York City. So me coming into, that, I mean, I came in with my own curiosity about technology, and of course music was right there. So as a small child, I'd be in my stepdad's recording studio, engineering sessions and, using all of the latest technology. So of course, that's why I wanted to buy my own stuff, because he was trying to give me like hand-me-down stuff during, Christmas and holidays and stuff, like birthday present. Here's an old 2-track. Like, oh, that's cool, but I actually want the newer one.
Yeah.
Okay, that's going to cost money, and a paper route's not going to cut it. So the music thing was first. And the acting came as a result of me realizing that I enjoyed being in front of the camera, and sort of starting to combine the music with the acting work. Like I started teaching myself how to make films and how to shoot and how to edit and how to do sound to picture and how to then score music to picture and all that kind of stuff in a time where the technology was a little bit more advanced. I wouldn't say it was like caveman style, right?
Yeah.
But it was still, compared to now, oh my gosh, ancient. So I learned using all of these very, very, integral techniques of how to do things. And so as I got older and as I was learning more by being on more sets with different creators, more, different directors and different DPs and different composers, and I would just watch and listen and learn and everything. And so when it came time to do like The Parenthood and all that stuff, and there was that opening of, oh, there's music that I can do. And, to this day, I still think about the guy who was the composer on the show and thinking about what that must have been like for him to have this gig. And over the course of the 5 seasons that it was on, like one of the cast members kind of slowly taking that job away from him. So I think about that sometimes. But on the other hand, he He's a guy who did the theme for Futurama, so I'm sure he's fine.
Yeah,
that's a classic song. Like everybody knows the theme for Futurama.
His royalties on that are most likely fine. I know he's not hurting off of Lost Parenthood checks, absolutely. But especially at that time, it was like I'm a multi-hyphenate, so I want to do everything. So in front of the camera, that's great. Behind the camera, that's great. Directing, shooting, editing, composing, mixing, visual effects, color correction, all those things I love doing. And so wherever I could kind of do more than one job, I was loving it.
Now, okay, so moving forward, they tell you they're not going to, revive your role anymore. Mm-hmm. What happens next for you as far as, okay, do you still want to do the sitcom stuff? Are you looking to get back into movies? Like, what's going through your head?
That's a great question. The thing that was interesting at the time was that, you would think it's like, well, oh, okay, I was just on a show that's successful for the most part, right? We're still on a network that's not what they call a quote unquote real network, right? And this is back in the day where it was like, they had the four major ABC, NBC, CBS, and Fox. Fox had just become a real network a few years earlier. So you would think like, oh, okay, well, you're on a show, so it shouldn't be that difficult to get right onto something else. Well, there's nothing further from the truth. You got to get right back out there and get back on that grind. And you got to get back in these casting directors' faces, and you got to just hit the pavement and just keep doing these auditions. And the thing that was interesting for me was at the time I was very much like, well, I want to really pursue more of my filmmaking stuff and my music stuff. And, I'll do these auditions and I'll see how far I get. But the deal was by that time I was in California. I was living in California, and the audition scene from LA is way different than New York. And you may hear other actors sort of talking about the difference between Los Angeles and New York from an actor's standpoint. And so it was too different of a vibe, and it was just weird. And so I did a couple of things here and there. But I chose to kind of focus more on the behind the scenes stuff, which ended up leading to a very, very diverse bunch of years in terms of the work that I ended up doing. I ended up doing some work with Kel Mitchell. I ended up doing a bunch of work with NSYNC, directing their video elements for their Pop Odyssey tour and their VMA performance where they had the 5 screens up there. And so I did a lot of that stuff. And then As Told by Ginger happened, and I started getting some more voiceover work. And so the on-camera thing, I kind of I put down for a second because I was kind of tired of, I was just tired of the rejection, to be honest. And I was and it was this weird transition thing because I was known as like, this teenager, and I was, known as this child actor, but I was at this point, 19, 20, 21, where I was transitioning into an adult. And that's usually the hard thing, right? Is that transition to the adult roles. And yeah, it was tough. It wasn't easy. So I was like, well, let me focus on some of these other aspects of what I enjoy doing. And like I said, yeah, there was some really cool stuff that came from that. As Told by Ginger being one of them, because I honestly don't even remember auditioning for As Told by Ginger. I just remember getting a booking like, oh, you got to show up for this thing. It's this new series. And I remember getting to the session and I asked them, hey, can you play my audition back? Because I just don't even know what I had done this character.
It's like,
and then they played it back. I was like,
and
I was like, oh, this one. Okay, cool. And that ended up being such an amazing experience doing the As Told by Ginger stuff.
Yeah, I believe it was like a couple of years ago that there was rumors coming out saying that there was a As Told by Ginger movie coming out. Did you ever hear about that?
I did. And the funny thing is my sister texted me with that info, and she was like, oh, there's a movie? And I was like, this is the first time hearing of it. I was like, that would be amazing if they did. Hope if there is a movie, hopefully they do call me back for that. Cause sometimes they just, but it was cool for a couple of minutes. And then I found out like, oh no, that wasn't real. And funnily enough, there this woman who runs this podcast. There's a podcast for As Told by Ginger, and they reached out to me, and I did an episode of their podcast. We kind of talked about that experience, but we did talk about the that rumor of there being a movie, and that'd have been exciting because all the actors on that show were just so great to work with. And the way that we recorded that show was also fantastic. And I think lent itself to the way that show felt in terms of the performances and stuff. And so that was great. Yeah, that would have been great. I mean, there's still time to do that As Told by Ginger movie. I'm not gonna let that go. But
what's crazy, because I mean, like, I've also heard rumors too that they said that like after the movie thing was found out to be false, that there's rumors that the show might be coming back. I mean, like, we're in an age now where it's like everything is coming back. I mean, like, Lizzie McGuire just got announced and is coming back to Disney Plus. You know what I'm saying? Show like animes like Dragon Ball Super and stuff like that. People, like, they love the stuff that came out in the 90s and early 2000s. So, I mean, do you know, or have you heard anything about As Told by Ginger show returning to Nickelodeon in the future?
I have not, but like I said, I think it would be great. And I think it would also be timely. I mean, especially the way that the show ended, and thinking about what the reboot would be, right? With Ginger and Darren as like a married couple with their kids.
Yeah.
And like, you know what I mean? Like, that would kind of be,
well, we had talked about, he's one of the few guys who quote unquote made it out of the friend zone.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Where you weren't sure.
Yeah.
You didn't think he was finally going to get the girl. I mean, you brought up Lizzie McGuire and Gordo to never land Lizzie, but you know.
Right. But Darren did it. And I mean, that was the great thing about that show, is that you get the scripts every week and you didn't know what was happening with the characters. So like the episode when Darren got his braces off and then he became like the hunk and the football players, and, you know, it's just like, oh, this is fun. This is fun because these characters have these layers and levels, and it's not just this one note thing.
And these are things that happen to people in real life.
Yeah, like us.
When you go away for the summer and you come back and you're like, dude, you grew like 2 feet or something crazy. Like, these things happen over the summer in real life. That's what I always loved about this show, was I couldn't necessarily relate to Ginger from a social standpoint.
We were guys.
Well, and even on top of that, I was never like not the cool kid. Not that I was Mr. Popular, but I didn't have a problem making friends.
Yeah.
And I was never socially awkward. So I couldn't necessarily relate to her, but you can relate to the show as a kid and a teenager and going through the motions and dealing with puberty and all these things.
Yeah.
And this show was on at a time where it's like you had shows like Rocket Power, Rugrats was still popular at the time, the Wild Thornberries. And, you know, one thing that I loved about this show was that it was for teenagers and it was for kids. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And one thing that I liked about your character was, like you said, he didn't just stay in that one role. Like, Darren was getting girls on the show. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And I even remember, like, there was some times where it's like Ginger was getting kind of jealous because, you know, this is my best friend and he's supposed to be with me. But it's like, nah, like, I need to get some too.
Right. And the beautiful thing was that, you know, he was getting the girls, but he was still the same guy.
Yep.
Right. That had the braces on before. So he was trying to sort of figure out how to navigate and deal with this new attention. Because that's the thing that they also don't really talk about, is it's like he would look in the mirror and see the brace face kid and not what, you know, these girls are seeing now. And he'd still have to figure out how to act with them and how to kind of deal with being the jock and being the star and all that kind of stuff. I think, you know, Emily Kapnick, who created that show and was the head writer for it, just does that kind of teen stuff so beautifully, where it's very realistic and very layered, but still palatable and not, you know, not way overblown and not too like complex that, you know, where it's like, well, this doesn't feel real.
I guess, you know, switching from there, something I know that we're definitely going to bring up is, you know, Saints Row.
Oh yeah. Yep. Now, the funny thing about Saints Row is I heard that they got a new one that they're about to go into production. We were going to
ask you about that too.
I haven't heard anything yet, so, you know, we'll see. Hopefully they know to you know, bring back the original crew.
Well, bro, I mean, like, I remember like when Saints Row 2 first came out, and like I want to say Grand Theft Auto 4 had came out like a few months before that, and I was just like, yo, like, this game is so much better than Grand Theft Auto 4, like, just with everything that you could do in the game, the way that all of the voice actors, the stuff that they were saying in the game and everything, it was just cool. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I know go ahead.
Video game stuff is on the one hand so much fun to do, and on the other hand is very, very taxing on your voice. Because you go in and it's sort of like, all right, so I come in and it's like, all right, you got 450 lines to record today in this session. Just like, wow,
yeah, that's
450 lines. And then it'll be like, all right, cool. And so for the last half hour, you're going to be doing your death and kill sounds, which is essentially screaming at the top of your lungs for like a half hour.
And making
then, like,
weird noises.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, now you're getting shot. Now you're getting punched. Now you're being set on fire. So the fire noises are a whole different level of scream, because it can't just be, oh, I'm falling from a building scream. It's I'm on fire scream. So that's all that extra high screechy stuff.
Yeah.
And and that's just what it is. But then when you get to sort of experience it in the video game, it's just like, oh, it's this whole world. I love doing the video game stuff because especially for a game like Saints Row, where they lean into the kitsch and they lean into these really amazing storylines that are just ridiculous. You get to do all kinds of crazy scenes. The fact that they had, what's his name as the president? Keith
David.
Keith David.
We were just talking about him earlier too.
Yo, and the funny thing is, you walk in the booth and you see those scripts and you're just like, this is amazing. The fact that you guys have Keith David as the president, amazing.
So when you guys recorded for the game, like, were you all in the same studio, or did you just do?
Not at all.
Okay.
It's just singular. Like, you come in and you got to just do 400 lines for that session, and you got to do as many as you can do until your voice gives out, or until they're like, oh, okay, we finished for the day. Then you just do that for a couple of weeks, and that's that's the game. But yeah, you don't interact with, or I didn't interact with anybody else. And so it's just, when you get to hear it all cut together, it's like, oh, that's what that scene is.
So were there any other video games that you did besides the Saints Row games?
I did one of the GTAs. I did,
nice.
I did this one, maybe something Heroes. It's on my site or whatever, but I can't remember the game, but all I remember was I was especially excited because it was a World War II game and I was playing a German soldier. And the reason why I was excited about that is because I do a pretty decent German accent, and I would never otherwise ever get to use that. It's like on camera, never. You're never going to see an American black actor with a German accent in a film, unless maybe I'll write that. Maybe I'll do that.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's one of those things that you never know. I mean, because I remember when I was younger. I mean, it's still, even to this day, it's like when British actors, it's like they have the American accents, and then when they're being interviewed, you're just like, oh wow, like I didn't know that they was British. Right.
So I got a story about that. So there was this movie that I did called Delivering Milo, and it was starring. He was young at the time, Anton Yelchin, who passed tragically a couple of years ago from Star Trek. And this movie was him as this. Basically, the concept was heaven was like corporate. And so you have all these angels in suits, and this one particular aspect of heaven was in charge of, birthing babies and putting new people out into the world. And it was this very clockwork situation. And so in this particular story, the kid didn't want to be born. And it was this whole thing about like, oh, we got to sort of get him out there. And I was playing one of like the corporate suits who had to deal with this guy that they were bringing down from like limbo, not from heaven, not really from hell, but like this guy who needed to kind of like, it was Albert Finney who played him. And it was kind of like he had to sort of like prove his worth to get into heaven, I guess. And so his job was, oh, you got to get this kid to want to be born.
Yeah.
And so the funny thing about that, so it was me and John Cho was also in it, and we were playing these roles. And when I went to audition for it, the role was for it was a British character. And so I went in with the accent, and the casting director was British, and I didn't break accent. And she literally did think that I was from some part in London. And that was the thing. That was like, that was the thing that I'd learned in all these years. It's like, if you're going in for something that you're, kind of not, if it's an accent or a role, a lot of times, sometimes, depending on who the casting director is, you got to walk in the door as that character. They don't necessarily want to see you come in as Kenn Michael. And then, now I turn it on because at that point, some of the magic is gone.
Right.
So I came in as that character. She thought I was British. I ended up getting the role, and we shot. They finished the movie, and we ended up coming back to do some reshoots. And the director told me, he was like, what's crazy? He said, we screened it in a couple of different places in the country. We were in Orange County in California, and some of the notes we got was, why is the African American speaking with a British accent? Right. And so the director was like, because maybe he's not African American, right? Like maybe he's not American, right? Like maybe he's actually British. But that was the thing. So it was like, so I had just done that thing, and I remember when I did press for that, I would go in and I would start an interview with the British accent, and I would do the whole thing and then pretend like, so it'd be like, they'd be like, well, how did you get into this? Well, me and my mates, we used to watch the telly a lot, and growing up, I really enjoyed like all this stuff, and I just really wanted to be on television and really, do the acting thing. And so when I came to the States, I had to learn a really good American accent in order to do the work. But like, this is how I normally talk, right? And so so the interview's like, wow, that's pretty good. I was like, no, I that's a British accent.
It was pretty good, bro.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So this video game, I got to do it my German accent as these German soldiers, and and that was a lot of fun, because again, it was this thing that I enjoyed kind of doing in real life, just kind of tripping people out, where like, oh hey, I would just start speaking as if I didn't really speak too much English, but I was German, and weird stuff. But it was fun to do. Sometimes you get those accents, some accents you can do a little bit better than others, and so you enjoy doing them, and especially with the German stuff.
That's hard.
Music
to me.
Well, yeah, and the funny thing about the German is a lot of it is sort of the attitude and how you put your words together to say specific things, and how you chop up the sentences so that there is a bit of that not smooth, but it's clearly a different language. Is your first language. It's
a very harsh language.
It's very harsh, but somehow it is easier for me to do. And the music software that I was using heavily at that time was called Logic Audio, and this was before Apple bought them.
Yeah, and put out Logic Pro.
Yeah, and so I was a beta tester for them for a number of years, and I was idolizing all the developers who built the software. And they were all from Germany. And I remember being in one of the beta meetings where they were showing off some new features. And the guy was on stage, so we're going to add these 50 parameters to the window. And I was like, ooh, parameters? Ooh, that's a good that's a good way to pronounce that. And so you just pick up a lot of these little things that you can use. So, it's just fun. It's the thing that I love about voiceovers is that, again, your physical appearance has nothing to do with what you can actually do voice wise. So you get to be anything and do any kind of character as long as you can nail that character. And I love that.
Now, just to plug them, so they get the proper credit. Is this Soldiers, Heroes of World War II?
Oh, I don't know.
Well,
I don't remember.
Well, that's who's getting the credit.
Yeah, I don't remember. I just remember doing the session. There was another session that I remember going in to do, and the character was like super gangster, super like in the street and all, this whole stereotypical voice and all that kind of stuff. And I remember showing up for the session, and the director was this British guy, and we were having this really nice conversation just about random stuff. And I'm, talking like this or whatever. And then I think he realized, he's like, oh, you're supposed to be doing this character? And there was a moment where he almost said, are you able to do that voice? Are you going to be able to? And I was going, are you serious? All right, let's get in the booth. And I mean, this is what you guys paid me to do. You're gonna like ask me a question if like, oh, because you speak this way normally, I don't know if you can do this other kind of voice or accent or whatever.
Yeah.
then you just get in the booth and you just nail it, and they go, okay, that's great.
Well, I mean,
But-
I don't know if you're a fan of the show, but I mean, have you ever seen anybody from Power that
yeah.
does an interview? Like, they just sound like regular dudes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
So-
that's the thing. It's called
Exactly. That's literally why it's called acting, right? That's the point of it.
acting.
So we've heard that, you did voiceover work, you've done music on shows and whatnot. Have you ever directed or produced anything?
Mm-hmm. I've directed pretty much every kind of format except for theater. So I've done commercials, I did some sitcom stuff, some multi-camera reality shows, docuseries, did a feature film with Kel. I've done short films. And so I've done all kinds of stuff with all kinds of genres and all kinds of vibes and all kinds of stuff. And that's been great. And so it's kind of like after all these years of kind of sort of circling around and doing all these different roles, it's nice because it's sort of like I'm coming into this new era in my life where a lot of the stuff that I've been wanting to do for a long time is possible now in terms of the industry, but more importantly, the delivery methods of how people enjoy content. So the fact that you can build whatever you want to build and build your distribution system within it, that's really, really exciting. So yeah, there's going to be a lot more stuff from me as a sort of an all-out, well-rounded creator, from the directing side, the writing, more acting stuff in front of the camera, music, technology, especially. That's another big thing. I've been developing some technology as well, and programming and coding, and so there's a whole lot of stuff coming down the pike.
Now, something that I want to ask you, aside from the acting thing, is more the music stuff, because I am a music engineer myself, went to school for it. And, for me, I just feel like even though I'm completely, in the box and I really don't use a lot of analog gear, I still feel like that late 90s, early 2000s is like the best recordings that you'll ever have. In my opinion, just from what I hear in my ear, because a lot of times now nobody's really recording in big time studios anymore, even the biggest hit songs, you know what I mean? It's usually in a bedroom.
Yep.
So going from then now as to what you were working on, I didn't know how big you had built your, equipment up in your room versus what are you working with now?
So it's such a great question. So when I started, so we're talking now like early to mid 80s, which is when I was really like introduced to the technology. So then the biggest thing that had just kind of hit was Sony's Dash recorder, the 3348 machine, which was a reel-to-reel 24-track digital machine, which was brand new at the time and ridiculously expensive. And that was the beginning of this transition from analog to digital. And I remember I was always a big fan of the digital because I loved working with computers. I loved working with samplers and drum machines and even digital synthesizers. For some reason, it was just my preferred aesthetic. The whole conversation about like the analog vibe and the fatness and the warmth and all that stuff, nobody was really talking about that then because analog tape was the norm. If you were recording something, it was going to be on analog tape unless you had the new fangled digital thing. But those very, very big studios had that. And then over the years, when I sort of started building my own studio, it was all pretty much Mac based and sequencer based. But then again, sort of the hand-me-down stuff was a big thing. So my studio as a kid in Stamford, Connecticut, I had a Studer 2-inch 24-track machine. I had 3 Yamaha DMP7s, which were their first sort of big digital mixers. And it was glorious, right? And then, of course, I moved out to LA, and then it was sort of like, all right, now this is, I've got Pro Tools, I've got Logic, I'm running all these these pieces of gear that from the developers, they're saying, oh, these aren't really supposed to work together. But I was like patching things together and doing all kinds of hybrid stuff using like Logic's audio engine with TDM and native at the same time. And back in the early 2000s, that was like the big thing, native versus DSP and TDM. And I had all the keyboards and all the modules, but like software synths were just starting to pop up. So it was like I was really excited about that and plugins and the whole thing. The holy grail was you were trying to get that analog sound. You were trying to get that sound of tape. You were trying to like get all that stuff in the box. And you were also trying to make your mixes sound good in the box. And just the years of working, of trying to really get that sound that was in your head to happen in the box was insane. Smash cut to right now, everything's fantastic. Like my studio now is primarily just my laptop and a couple of controllers. I do scoring in Logic, but I do pretty much the rest of my music stuff in Ableton. So like I've got a push and some Native Instruments controllers and like just all the software. And I have no issues with the sounds that I'm getting, or, you know, like I, for so long, wanted to build that hybrid analog digital studio. Like I was like, oh, I got to have another tape machine. I got to get, and my stepdad's just like, this was like 15 years ago. And I was telling him, I was like, I want to get another tape machine. He was like, why? Yeah. I was like, well, just to get that warmth. And he's like, no, that's not. He's like, don't get caught up in the hype. He's like, first of all, if you get a tape machine, where are you going to buy tape from? And are you really prepared to spend that much for rolls of tape? And you got to maintain the machine. And where are you going to get parts? And like, oh, it was all this stuff. And I was like, yeah. And then years later, I was like, yeah, no, he was totally right. But at that time, I was like, oh, but I got to have the analog console and with the digital and this and that. And now I don't miss analog anything. I don't miss tape. I don't even miss analog consoles. I feel it's the same way that I feel about where we are in our visual technology in terms of, you know, the cameras now, the cinema cameras, digital cinema cameras. I feel like with there, it used to be like, okay, we're going to, you know, film this pristine image and then we're going to muck it up and add film grain and do all these LUTs and all this stuff to try and make it look more like film. Now I just enjoy the pure image, right? I just enjoy the pure image of whatever that digital is, with really high-end digital, beautiful color science, rich colors, great dynamic range. And I feel the same way with audio now. I feel like the tools are so amazing that there's no real limit. The limit is just whatever you can imagine. So I don't really even miss the desire to sort of have the hybrid studio. I just feel like this stuff is so good. The software is so good. The tape emulations, whether or not they sound just like tape, I don't care. Does it sound like a texture that I want? Perfect. That's what I want.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm huge, you know, into the automation of music, you know, especially when it comes to, I'm super big on vocals.
Yep.
So nowadays, you know, you're getting these like crazy automated echoes and reverbs and all this stuff going in and out and all this panning and stuff like that just always like blows my mind. You know, it's a whole science, you know?
Oh, absolutely. And it's, you know, and it's what's available when you have the tools to literally automate down to the sample level, you know, where I remember, you know, back in the day when you were doing mixes before you were using automation, you know, a mix was a performance. And so if you couldn't do it by yourself, you had a couple of other people with you. Okay, so you're going to do the vocal rides over there. I'm going to do the mutes on the drums. You're going to do, you know, the guitars and the backgrounds. And it was a whole thing because you had to perform the mix. And if you messed up, you had to go back to the beginning or you would splice versions together. You know, even with when I started sort of doing my own little short films and I would build up these nice little soundtracks and sound effects and music and stuff. And there was no automation. Pro Tools at the time the first version of Pro Tools was just 4 channels of audio. And you know, you had to perform that mix. And if you messed up, you had to go right back to the beginning and start again. I don't miss those days. I know a lot of people are nostalgic. I remember I was going through a point where I was like, oh, I'm going to buy a lot of the same gear that I had when I was a kid, just for nostalgic value. I'm going to get like these drum machines or this keyboard and all that stuff. And I got them from eBay or whatever. And I plugged them in and I thought like, yeah, I'm going to integrate this into my music setup. And I'm like, not really. I'll just sample it and then that'll be it. That'll be fine. Obviously you can't, you know, sampling an analog synthesizer, that's blasphemy. But yeah, no, I just feel like all the tools are there, visual, audio, music. and all this, the computer stuff and the computer technology is just so beautiful, and software is just amazing with some really good hardware that gets you in and out conversion wise. And that's kind of like it, especially because of the way that we consume content these days.
Exactly.
Like, people are listening to songs on the iPhone speaker and they're like, yeah, jam it out. And I'm just like, 15 years ago, that would have been like, oh, don't do that. Please put, but it's like, however you want to enjoy the content is however you want to enjoy the content.
Okay, so now I wanted to go ahead and get into Cannon Busters.
Yeah.
Okay, so so like, how did you get into this? Like, before we get to Cannon Busters, are you a fan of anime or manga?
Right. So here's my thing. Like, I love anime. I'm not extremely well versed on it. So here are my big anime influences, right? Akira and Ghost in the Shell. And that's kind of where I get a lot of my anime sensibilities from, because just the story of Akira, just blew my mind back in the day. And I just loved, firstly, I would watch the English dub. There was one particular English dub that I had on my Akira Laserdisc from the early 90s, and they redid the dub for, I guess, all the digital remastering, and I was like, I missed the old dub.
Yeah, the ADV dub, I believe, is what it was.
Oh man, because it was just, if you're not listening to the original Japanese audio, which is great, of course, as well, but like that one, I just fell in love with that particular English dub, probably because that was the one I grew up with, and I just didn't really enjoy the new ones as much. So the anime stuff I loved and I would watch, but I didn't really get too much into the Dragon Ball Z stuff as much, or that kind of stuff. It was pretty much just a lot of those like super, super high concept, crazy, AI robot type anime things. And so being able to do Cannon Busters, well, before I did Cannon Busters, I did this dub for this movie called MKFZ.
We were going to bring that up too, because that one's stacked with, a cast.
Oh man. And that's, so the interesting thing is the dots, right, of getting to Cannon Busters and MKFZ was, so the guy who did the music for As Told by Ginger, this guy named Jared Faber, I met him because I had to go over to his studio one time to do a record. Darren was like singing a song at the end of one of the episodes. So I had to go to his studio to sort of record that. And before I got there, everybody was like, oh, you're going to love Jared. Like, you guys are so like similar and blah, 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 blah. And I went over, and me and him just became like instant friends, because we're both like gearheads and tech heads. And we're just, like loving the gear and loving the music. And so we just became friends. One of his friends is this guy named Michael Sinter-Nicholas, who is a voice actor, great voice actor, but also does a lot of directing and has a post company that does a lot of these dubs, these English dubs. And so we became friends, and his producer, he works with Stephanie Shea. And so we've known each other for years. And last year at some point I got, just through my voiceover agent, I got these two auditions that were really, really interesting, because the characters and stuff were just like, it was just unlike a lot of the other kind of things I was getting, right? And so it was the MKFZ and Cannon Busters. It was kind of like the same thing, and they were both coming from Michael and Stephanie. And the direction on both of them was like, well, Cannon Busters specifically was, Cannon Busters was like, well, usually when they push out roles to like black actors, the sense is, okay, well, if it's coming to a black actor, then they're going to want a little bit of that quote unquote black dialect. Right. And that sounds crazy to say, but that's a real thing as a black actor. Like, that's, it's like, if they don't want that, they'll just hire a white actor. Right. Yeah. Like, and so if you're getting an audition, it's like, oh, there's a slight, and it's so subconscious, but it's just that expectation that you're going to put a little quote unquote flavor on it. Right. And it's like, this is 2019 and it's still like, that hasn't let up at all. But Cannon Busters specifically, they were like, we don't want any flavor put on it at all. Because it's not about that. And I was like, ooh, that's fun. That'll be interesting. So I ended up booking the MKFZ, and I did a couple more things for Cannon Busters because LaShawn wanted to hear some like different aspects of my voice and all that kind of stuff. But I ended up booking both of those things. And
nice.
So Michael directed me on both of those the MKFZ film and the Cannon Busters. And this was maybe my first time really being directed by him, and he was killing it. I mean, he really, of all the stuff that I've done, I will say like these last two, the MKFZ and Cannon Busters, are really kind of some of my favorite performances, because Michael's bringing out all of these like layers and all of these things that he was, really making me act and work. And a lot of times when you get these dubs that are just doing the English dubs, like a lot of these houses, it's just like a factory, and it's just like, oh, whatever, just say the lines, make sure it's, synced with the lip flap, and we'll move on. But Michael and Stephanie, like they really put a lot of detail work into it. And so it just became this really awesome experience of really kind of diving into these characters and pulling out these really kind of layered, rich performances. And I had a great time. So by the time we got to Cannon Busters, oh my gosh, because playing a character like Philly, having that kind of energy where he's always angry, he's always irritated, he's exploding and having these like rants. Oh, I love those, because that's actually an aspect I liked about anime, was those explosive moments, right? Where they would do the graphics and their face would get all distorted and they'd go into this like other reality kind of thing and everything is all weird. And then it would go right back to the scene. I love that. And to be able to sort of play that for episodes and episodes and that be like his thing, we just had so much fun. We had so much fun. And of course, LaShawn's vision, it was just beautiful and epic and amazing. And so to hear him talk about his intentioning for the series, to see some of the, when we were recording, they were still working on the last couple of episodes from an animation perspective. So he would show me like the roughs of how they were putting the scenes together. And I'm just like, that is unbelievably fascinating. And the amount of work that goes into these kinds of shows is just incredible.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah, I know. I was telling Travis about LaShawn and how like he did work on stuff like Black Dynamite
Boondocks.
and the Boondocks. Yeah. And, when you really think about, because I mean, like growing up Black, we love anime, you know what I'm saying?
Yep.
And
yep.
we want to see that representation, because it's like, of course, like I said, growing up, when you see most animes, it's like they would just have white characters in the show. So when you do finally get an anime where it's like most of the cast of characters on this show is predominantly Black, and they're voiced by Black actors, you know what I'm saying? Because I was even telling the guy at my job that most animes that had Black characters up there back in the day, it's like they were voiced by white actors, you know what I'm saying? Like they didn't sound Black at all. But it's like when you watch Cannon Busters, it's like when you see the Black characters, they're voiced by Black actors. You know what I'm saying? I think that that's cool, and the representation matters. I mean, like it goes back to what you were saying about back when you were younger, and how when they wanted Black actors, they only wanted them to do just the one-dimensional characters. Either thug or something else. Whereas like now, it's like the sky's the limit. You know what I'm saying? You can you can do anything. And we had another voice actor up here before. His name is Chris Piper, and he was just telling us like how the voice acting field is so huge now for diversity, because back then it's like you had like one guy voicing 10 characters on the show.
Everything. Yep.
Whereas now it's like you're bringing in these new voice actors, and it's like, all right, you're voicing this character, you're voicing that character, and it's like you sound different. Because I mean, like going back to Dragon Ball Z, it's like even though the voice actor like Christopher Sabat, like we love Christopher Sabat, but it's like you can tell which characters he is, because it's because his voice. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah, and that's the crazy thing about the voice game is that. There's still, it's opened up a little bit, but at the end of the day, right, the crazy thing is that the super, super talented ones who can do just 100 voices, and they just end up getting a lot of the work, because it's like the producers and directors say, we'll keep using the same people that we're used to, because they can do all the things that we want them to do. And so sometimes becomes a hard sort of bit to get into, because there's so, like I've done a couple of series with Cree Summer, for example.
Yeah.
who's like, I mean, legend in the game.
Yeah,
I mean,
everybody knows who Cree Summer is.
Penny from Inspector Gadget is how far she goes back. And I was doing this pilot with her, and because of course she was an asshole by Ginger, but we did this pilot together, and it was her and Tom Kenny who did SpongeBob voice, right?
Yeah.
And I just remember I was in a room with the two of them, and I think there was another voice actor who's another like legend, and I just was going, wow, like it's amazing for me to be here. Because it's slightly intimidating because the amount of skill, right? So the director of this pilot was the guy who was the voice of Buster Bunny, and as well as Cow and Chicken and the Devil. Like he did all three of those voices in that show.
Right, that's crazy.
And so he's like this really super well-known like director in that industry, and he's known for his super, super intense sessions because he can do it all. So he kind of demands that from his actors. And I remember he had Tom Kenny do it was like some bit, and the back and forth, how quick it was like, all right, so he's falling off a cliff. All right, so give me the fall sound. Okay, now do it like he's spinning around. Okay, now do it like he's spinning around and he's holding like an anvil. Okay, now do it when he's off and every time the adjustment, Tom Kenny would do something completely different, but hitting it like dead on, spot on, at a blistering pace. Like there was no time to be like, oh, let me figure out what I want to do. Like, no, it was automatic. And that's how good these like people are at the top of their game, right? Which makes it harder for new people to come in who,
right.
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Because it's sort of like these cats who can do all of those voices, they just do all of those voices. But again, because the amount of content that's coming, these new creators, these new distribution platforms, yeah, it's opening up. So we can get something like a Cannon Busters on Netflix that feels amazing, that is super well done. Hopefully we get a second season. I mean, like that would be.
I was just about to ask you
amazing.
about that because I mean, like, I like how it ended on the cliffhanger. And spoiler alert for people that's listening, but I like how it ended on the cliffhanger, and it's like, okay, I want season 2, man. Like for real, like this is a really good show. I've recommended it to a bunch of people, especially if you grew up in the 90s, early 2000s watching animes like Cowboy Bebop and Trigun and even Samurai Champloo. It's like you have all of that mixed into this anime, and then you have mechs too. Like who doesn't love mechs?
Oh man, and you know what's crazy about it was that doing my scenes, I'm only seeing my scenes. So when the show came out and I got to see like all those other stories being intertwined that I didn't even know about, I mean, you know, like they would make reference to them, but to see how these other stories were just beautifully woven together was just really beautiful. And I was in New York when the show came out on Netflix, and I was watching it with my sister and just really just being like, wow, like I felt really honored to be a part of this particular project. It felt really good because I really liked how it came out, and it was like, wow, like this is really nice. It's a really, really good show.
Yeah, and it's like when you think about it too, like you're pretty much a part of history because like a lot of black fans or blurs, as we like to call ourselves.
Yeah, man.
When we think about
carrying member.
oh, what was that? I'm sorry.
I said card carrying member.
Like, bro,
from
it's
day
like
one, blurred.
When you think of like the black animes, I know some people don't consider the Boondocks, but I consider the Boondocks an anime.
Totally.
You really only have Boondocks, Black Dynamite, and Afro Samurai, and that's pretty much it.
That's pretty much it.
But here's the thing with those, though. Again, they do fall into those stereotype categories in a lot of sense, where Cannon Busters is strictly... the only thing that makes them black is literally skin tone.
Yeah, I agree.
There's nothing in there that you can hear or say they must be black or something like that.
Right.
But you can kind of in Afro Samurai where it's like Samuel Jackson just yelling and doing what he does.
Oh yeah.
And of course we all know Boondocks.
Yeah, of course.
Of course. And that that was LaShawn's thing, where he was like, this is not about African Americans. This is this is taking place in a completely different realm, a completely different thing. So it's not about any of the American stuff. It's not about any of those stereotypes or any of those tropes. And that's what I really loved about it, because we got to create from that space instead of, going back to what, everybody else has kind of done or where it's kind of expected or that kind of thing. Like we got to really just be like, all right, so what would this sound like? And so, getting Philly's character, it took a few episodes for Philly's character to really kind of settle. I feel like personally for me, it wasn't until like episode 4 where I really started to be like, okay, I know how Philly would sound going into this scene now. Like I know what what his reaction is going to kind of be, and sonically, and what I have to kind of do to my voice.
Right.
Because that was the thing. We were trying to find it for a minute. We were trying to find it for a minute.
But I think that's the great thing about LaShawn is he's not necessarily like pigeonholed into this like guy who writes strictly for black entertainment.
Yeah.
I mean, when you really look at his catalog, I mean, he's worked on Lizzie McGuire, Cora, Batman, Green Lantern.
A lot of animation.
He's worked on all these things. So for him to present something and this is, a comic strip that he wrote. This is a story that's written by him.
This is his baby. This is his material. Yeah. And
he's making a point to say, the only thing that makes it black entertainment is the skin tone. And we can have things for black people that meets this little checklist that unfortunately most of Hollywood has.
Yeah.
Yep.
One thing that I wanted to ask you, this goes back to when you was talking about when you were in the room with Tom and Cree and, these legendary voice actors and actresses. A legend in the voice acting field who I really love is Phil Lamar. Did you ever happen to work with him at
all? We've never worked together, but we would always cross paths. And just a nice guy, super talented, and just him, Kenneth Michael Richardson. Who's another?
Oh yeah, he's a legend too, man.
Oh my gosh, and these are the cats who are just like, they're just killing the game. And you look at their output, and you look at the variety of characters that they've played on all these different projects and all these different shows, and it's inspiring. It's inspiring. I mean, it's a wonderful way to make a living, I feel. There's like this this index of how strenuous it is depending on what kind of thing you're doing as an actor. And so at the top of the list, I put in terms of like, they're going to be working you tough is if you're doing like an hour-long drama on television. And if you're the star of that drama, oh my gosh, you're always working and it's always very intense and the schedule's nuts. If you're on a sitcom, multi-camera sitcom, like old days on the stage, that's probably one of the easiest jobs as an actor, relatively. Again, I'm not saying that it doesn't take work and skill and all that kind of stuff, but when you think about, okay, I have to read these lines, there's some jokes in here, I just got to hit these jokes and hit my marks and know the blocking, like that's pretty easy as far as like a work thing goes. I remember after The Parenthood, I did a guest episode on Living Single.
Oh, nice. That's another classic show.
Oh my gosh. So that show is so classic. So normally when you're starting on a new sitcom, the normal schedule is 5 days of work, right? Monday through Friday, you're rehearsing Monday through Wednesday. You have some run throughs at Wednesday and then Tuesday and Wednesday. And then Thursday and Friday, you're kind of like Thursday, you're blocking with camera and you're shooting a little bit. And then Friday, you do your show with the audience, right? And that's usually how a sitcom would go, like new sitcom, 5 days. You go a couple of seasons, you get good. They cut that 5 days down to 4 days, right? Now they've compressed the schedule a little bit because everything's pretty much locked in and we can get rid of a day, right? You're still getting paid the same, but now you're just working 4 days. Living Single was on 3-day weeks. That was amazing because you basically go on set and the director was just kind of like maintaining people because the actors by that point, they knew their characters better than anybody else on set. Yeah. So the scene would happen. And instead of a director kind of going, okay, so for the blocking, we're going to start you guys here and then you're going to walk in, all that stuff. The actors blocked themselves. And they were just like, all right, so we're going to come in and we're just going to do this thing. And the director's just kind of taking notes. All right, I'm going to put my cameras here, blah, blah, blah. 3-day shoot. It was the most amazingly efficient shoot I had ever been on as far as sitcom work. And so you talk about like that, 3 days of work on that, and you're still making the same amount of money. Oh, that was amazing. But again, on the other side, drama, oh my gosh, always working. Feature films, a little bit of a slower schedule if it's a bigger budget, right? They have a lot more wait time. But voiceover work, of course, it's taxing on your voice, depending on the thing. But the beauty of it is that you get to go in a booth and be silly. So I would say that's the most fun type of work that you can have as an actor.
So what's next for you? Because I had just looked and I saw that, Cannon Busters was the most current thing that you've worked on. Like, so what's the next big project for you?
I'm doing a whole bunch of stuff, man. Like, I've been developing technology in the music field over the last couple of years, building an instrument that deals with sacred and healing sound frequencies and harmonics. So if you're into sound baths or experimenting with, sacred number sequences and how that affects your music, or if you're dealing with frequencies that are resonating to certain body or energetic fields like chakras or states or anything like that, like this allows you to integrate any of that work into your normal electronic music production workflow. And that's kind of a big thing. I have this love for technology, and I have this love of, we're all spiritual beings, so that is inherent. And so bringing those two things together, I feel, is kind of the future. We're building AI and we're doing all this stuff, and we were told decades ago, just don't build Skynet. Don't build Skynet. And what are we doing? We're building Skynet. We're like all these countries have Skynet. We're doing all these things, and we're imbuing this new intelligence with all of our biases and flaws as humans, and not imbuing our inherent spirituality into it. And so the thing that I'm fascinated and curious about is there's all this ancient knowledge about, where we come from, and a lot of these sort of more subtle etheric practices and ways to sort of affect energy around. And if we can combine that with this amazing technology that we're building, I think there's some really cool stuff that we can do there that can help sort of push the ball forward from an evolutionary perspective for humans and all other beings on this planet. And so that's kind of where my focus is. And so even from the acting and the directing standpoint, writing stories and directing projects that have some of those concepts in it, so that, you're watching something and you leave with a new thought, something that you hadn't really thought about before, but now you can kind of crunch on it. That's the stuff that I really enjoyed growing up. Those films that really kind of it opened your mind a bit and go, oh, I didn't even think about that possibility, but now that's possible in my mind, and what can come from that. The beautiful thing that I love about watching these old science fiction movies, you go all the way back to like 2001, and you look at some of the stuff that they had visually in that, where you're looking at things that look like iPads in the late 60s.
Yeah.
And all this stuff. And I truly believe that art influences science, which influences art. So you have, coming from the mind of somebody who pulls an idea down that doesn't exist, right? The technology behind it isn't there yet, but they're going to put it in this movie and they're going to actually make it a real thing. Now you've got this generation of technologists and scientists who grew up going like, oh, I got to build this communicator that was in Star Trek. Oh, that becomes an iPhone or becomes something.
Apple Watch.
All these things that I truly believe. So that's kind of what's next for me, is really kind of getting into that thing and working with the new sort of technologies for storytelling as well. VR, AR, 360 dome stuff. There's all kinds of new storytelling technology that I feel can really help us get to the next level. Because as much as I love, looking at these rectangle boxes on screens, that's cool. But let's take that one step further.
Yeah, man, that's like next level stuff. You know what I mean? The things that you don't even think you're going to see in your lifetime. Yeah. So
I mean, that's the cool thing. I don't know if you guys are up on like Ray Kurzweil or any of that stuff, but there's all these books that he wrote about the coming of AI, and he was writing this stuff in the 90s. And I went back and read some of the books that he wrote in the 90s, predicting sort of the technology that was going to come in the following decades. And the dope thing about him is that he was just so spot on so much stuff. And when I first learned about the concept of the singularity and all that kind of stuff, I was like, oh yeah, totally, that's totally going to happen. But the question is what is it going to look like? What are we creating? Are we going to create from our fear, or are we going to create from our love? And I want to create from love. So that's what I'm doing.
Well, we applaud that over here. And we really appreciate, you giving us as much time as you gave us tonight.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much, guys. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, we did too, man. Like, bro, it's like, because I've been a fan, but it's like I found out like so much more about you tonight, man. And we really appreciate you coming on and doing this for us, bro.
Thanks, man. Well, thank you, like I said, for reaching out, because it's nice when you do stuff and people get to enjoy it. I mean, it's always nice to hear people enjoy something that you worked on and that you worked hard on. It feels great. So I appreciate you guys.
Yeah. So I'm wrapping this up. Before we let you go, please tell everybody in social media land where they can find you at.
Okay, so I am Kenn Michael, Kenn with 2 N's, KENNMICHAEL, and that's pretty much me on everything: Instagram, Twitter. I deleted Facebook, so that's a whole other story. But yeah, you can find me at Kenn Michael pretty much everywhere.
All right, cool.
Oh, and KennMichael.com for my website. Yeah.
Cool. All right, so again, thank you again for joining us, bro, and we'll talk to you again soon. Have a good day.
Great. Thanks, guys. You too.
Peace.
Appreciate it.
All right, bye.
Be sure to smash that like button if you enjoyed this video and get notified every time we upload a new one by subscribing and ticking the bell icon. You can also listen to the full episode by searching for Leveling Up with Benjamin Banks on your favorite podcast app. If you'd like to help support more great content like this, be sure to check us out on Patreon. We'll have the link posted in the description below. Thanks for listening, and see you on the next episode of Leveling Up with Benjamin Banks.